when the angles of light pass into your being through your eyes as a human being and they hit your pineal. And that pineal, which is this ultimately a small bag of liquid with a retina inside it, and inside there are materials which are so similar to DMT, and they are light reactant. If you strike DMT with a hammer in its crystal form, it flashes all different rainbow colours. Ultimately, it's an internal projector. What brought that to me is the fact that when its mother died, the photon that was embodying its mother, just as a core photon that is you embodies you, had set about to go to him and tell him, go to this place because that's the only place you will survive. No one else would have fed it, because culturally they say that owls or bundis are a bad omen in Tanzania. Whereas for me, I know they are an angelic force, and a lot of my team are starting to see that as well, because they understand the relationship I'm having with the wild animals in Tanzania. And others are starting to have that too. So, talking to angels and accepting photons, that's exactly the same thing.
I saw a white buffalo coming down off the hills. I saw an old white owl flying up from the fields. He was coming for me. He was delivering a message.
Hey guys, so I thought I'd share with you all a beautiful story that happened on Christmas Day that involved a stunning spirit bird, a jet white barn owl. So, and I also want to cover how this works. How do spirit animals work? I think you all know from watching me on YouTube that I have a lot of interactions with wildlife, and it is spirit, that's what it is. It's angels embodying them. I'll get onto the science of it, because there is a science to talking to angels, and there's a science to understanding spirit animals, and there's a science to understanding what was happening in every single spiritual and religious practice on earth when it came to things like the concept of communing with angels, or the concept of receiving signs from God via other life forms. We know that shamans do it very often, we know pagans do, but also in Christianity it alludes to it as well, which is the most famous religion where I was brought up, when you have the story of the donkey, and the donkey sees the angel when the human being cannot. And that's obviously depicting the fact donkeys don't have a carnal mind like a human, and thus they are more sensitive to the present moment, basically, because the carnal mind drags you away from the present moment. It gives you thoughts of past and future, whereas you should be more focused in the present moment when it comes to speaking with God. So I was here, down here on Christmas afternoon, which is next to the place where I grew up, and a beautiful white barn owl appeared. Now, people don't see them very often. In fact, while I was standing watching it, a local guy who walks his dogs down here came and asked me what I was looking at, and I said there's a barn owl sitting in this grass just along from me. But it had flown towards us and then landed in the grass. So he told me he'd never seen one down here, and I found that unusual, because every time I come home I'm seeing barn owls when I'm with Fritzy. We see them here, other areas, we always see owls.
You don't see much wildlife now like here.
You don't see barn owls on Christmas Day very often, that's for certain. We always do, and I always receive these little beautiful moments with them, and I know it's God, I know it's spirit communicating. So, because of this stunning owl appearing on this cold Christmas afternoon, we were heading for our Christmas lunch at the time. We were having a pre-Christmas lunch walk, and we stopped and we waited maybe 15 minutes, and then when the owl left, we left. I have an old friend here who is in his 80s. His name is Ken, and Ken and I had a very close relationship. He has a passion for truth, and he's also a long distance runner, and he still runs 9 miles a week even though he's in his 80s. So Kenny and I had a very strong friendship, and it broke my heart a lot when I had to leave here and I was no longer able to see Ken. So in March, when Fritzi was here and she was pregnant, she met Ken for the first time down here. He was running down here, and I said, "This is my friend Ken," and I told her about him, and she couldn't believe that he was running at his age. So she said she had a feeling, and she said, maybe we should go and see Kenny. And I said, yes, I plan to do so, but not today because we're going for our Christmas lunch. And I know Ken used to spend his Christmas with a friend, but sadly this year he wasn't able to. And Ken has no family. He's completely alone. He was never married, never had children, so he's like all people, when you're alone in certain times of the year, it's a very big struggle. And Ken, like all other persons, struggle with loneliness at Christmas. Perfectly normal thing, and I know Ken wouldn't mind me saying that. So we get in the car, and because I'd spent this extra 15 minutes, I drive up in the car, and Ken appears walking down the beach by himself on Christmas Day. So I stopped naturally and spoke to an old friend of mine, and it was such a beautiful experience because I could see what it meant to Ken, because he was worried about me. He'd heard I was sick, and I'd heard from my neighbour that he'd been asking how I was, and he'd also never met Aslan, and he was waiting to meet Aslan because he'd met Fritzi when she was pregnant. So we spent some time with Ken because of that, and we delayed our Christmas lunch. And I knew throughout, that barn owl had came to us because it was a messenger from God, and it was purely there to delay me. So as an old friend could have a little bit of company and love on a day of the year, which can be very lonely if you don't have family and loved ones around you. So that barn owl, that beautiful white owl, which I've got a little bit of footage of, was undoubtedly a spirit bird. And the idea of a spirit bird and how that works is quite simply, the world we live in is made of light and vibration. Now, angles of light carry on them photons, and photons are particles, and those particles contain within them information. An angel is a messenger of light. Angle of light carries a photon which ultimately has messages within it. When you are not using your carnal mind, when you are not thinking too much, then you have the ability to accept those angles of light, those angels, those photons into your being much more readily and easily. If you don't alter the vibratory state of your temple, which is an antenna of prayer, locked in the physical world but has the ability to commune with the spiritual world. When you know how to alter the vibration of your body, you can access the acceptance of photons from areas you don't know, and they bring with them knowledge, wisdom and guidance. They are the angels of God. Now, animals have no carnal mind, and they still have to accept the photon, but it's much more easy for them to. And the photon is accepted when the angles of light pass into your being through your eyes as a human being, and they hit your pineal. And that pineal, which is this ultimately a small bag of liquid with a retina inside it, and inside there are materials which are so similar to DMT, and they are light reactant. If you strike DMT with a hammer in its crystal form, it flashes all different rainbow colours. Ultimately, it's an internal projector, but it's also an internal connection to the world that is unseen. When we want to be guided by angels, it's not that they are not guiding everybody, because they are trying to. It's just that most of us think so loudly that when those whispers come into the pineal, for me, when I'm in a silent state, if I'm down here and God wishes to deliver a message with a photon, with an angel, they'll come into me in the angles of light and I'll feel it, not as a physical thing, but I feel ideas rising in me. I feel answers to prayers rising in me. I feel solutions to problems rising in me. These are the angels guiding me. But if I'm busy and chattering, and I'm around people who are talking a lot and it's super busy, I can't hear it. And it happens still, but I don't hear it. And God has to work again. He has to send another angle of light with a photon to deliver that message and guidance that I'm crying out for. Of course, Christmas Day was a busy day and it was too much chatter in my mind. And thus God had to find another solution to the problem of the fact that there was a beautiful human being, who Ken is, a very beautiful man, very kind and loving gentleman, who is alone at Christmas and struggling, no doubt. And God was saying, okay, I can't get into John because he's too busy chatting and there's been all the family and gifts and all that stuff. Let me go into this bird, because then the physical side of John, the carnal side of John, will see it and pause. And God does that regular with me. And you see it with the animals I have relationships with, not just predominantly my enormous pack of dogs, which is bordering on 100 dogs, as you all know, but the wild animals like Shogun and Spooky 2, the two most recent ones, but there have been countless more before there, where I have relationships with wild animals like a wild owl. And then when that wild owl struggles, all of a sudden its child appears at my doorstep needing help. A wild spotted eagle owl landing outside my door and sitting in a tree outside my home in Tanzania. So as I would provide for it, and I did provide for it, as you know, I fed it rats and so on, natural foods, otherwise they lose the connection of hunting. And it got through the week and it left, and I've seen it since in the wild. What brought that to me is the fact that when its mother died, the photon that was embodying its mother, just as a core photon that is you embodies you, had set about to go to him and tell him, go to this place because that's the only place you will survive. No one else would have fed it, because culturally they say that owls or bundis are a bad omen in Tanzania, whereas for me, I know they are an angelic force, and a lot of my team are starting to see that as well, because they understand the relationship I'm having with the wild animals in Tanzania, and others are starting to have that too. So talking to angels and accepting photons, that's exactly the same thing. But ultimately, as your carnal mind, as Christianity says, is enmity to the laws of God. In other words, your ego, as they say in Buddhism, must die in some which way, shape or form, or at least must become a friend of yours. And you must not allow your ego to attach to certain things to claim its identity, which is a very common theme we see. We see a lot of people who feel they are spiritual. For example, I noticed when I was in the vegan community, people egoically attached to their veganism and felt that that made them spiritual, and actually the egoic attachment eliminates it. So that death of the carnal mind is basically only achieved through a thoughtless state. And through a thoughtless state, it doesn't mean that you never think. It means that as you look out at the world, you are not anticipating. You must, to understand human potential, we have the ability to prepare for the future. Other animals don't necessarily have that same ability as the depth that we do. Some do store food, etc. But we have that ability, and it makes us strong, actually. But if we don't learn to stop moving between past and future and be totally present-minded, which is what happens with our education system. It drags you to the future, it drags you to the past, but it doesn't teach you how to be centered here and now in the present moment. And if we don't learn how to stop flip-flopping between past and present within our carnal mind, within our ego, then we don't come to the present moment. And when we don't come to the present moment is observing everything before you without label, emotion and opinion. It's quite simply it. You plug back into the state of being that babies are in, where they have no concept of self and other, and they are just a continuance of everything happening around them. And Jesus alluded to this where he said in the Gospel of Thomas that a person will have no shame in asking a newborn child about the kingdom of heaven. And he's alluding to the idea that children are carnal mind free, so they have the ability to understand the present moment, which is the heavenly state for human beings, because that's where you will experience the true joy of Christ, because you take no thought for your life, as Jesus instructed in the Bible. And as he said, let the little children come to me, because the kingdom is made for such as these. So photons must be something you work with. You must accept them into yourself. And to do that, you must be able to attune to the present moment and also uphold the righteous life that the instructions of people like Jesus Christ left for us and guided us to live by. We are not to live by the impulses of our animal nature alone. They are useful for the propagation of our species and procreation. But when they control all that you are, then you're going to struggle, because as a human being, when the primal instincts control you, you'll tend to find that the ego, the carnal mind, labels and works with those primal urges. Now, if you can be a disciplined being in the present moment and take no thought for your life, then you come to the point where you can live more righteously, but above all else, you can call on God for guidance. And if you are aware of your present moment only, then you will find the ability to be able to accept those angles that we're referring to and those photons contained within those angles for guidance. But not only that, also as well, if any beings come in the form of spirit animals, etc., then you'll be spatially aware of your surroundings enough, because you're here now. If I was even here now, even though I wasn't fully here now Christmas Day, but if I hadn't been present to the degree that I had not seen the owl, because I wasn't spatially aware of what was happening around me, then I would have missed the message again. And that's why God can't communicate with people who are dwelling in the carnal mind, because they're living in the past, living in the future, and their mind's very rarely only here and now. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to functioning as a human being, spiritually, physically, emotionally and mentally, the only efficient place for a human to function is the present moment. Because if you build a time machine and you go back in time to try and solve your problems, when you get out that time machine, it'll be now again. And if you haven't sussed out how to live in the now, even with the time machine, when you get out of it, you won't know how to solve your problems again, because your mind will still not be present. Your mind will be inside its own illusions of future and past. God bless, guys. I love you all.